In a world where loyalty often seems forgotten, some values still stand strong. Bill Anderson, a 72-year-old farmer, was about to lose everything: his land, his legacy, and decades of dedication to his country. For half a century, he had provided an essential service to military pilots, ensuring they had a reliable place to train. But when corporate developers set their sights on his farm, it looked like the end of an era. That is, until one sign changed everything. Within 24 hours, an unexpected turn of events would alter the course of his life forever. Welcome to Tales Unveiled, where we bring you stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the power of doing what's right. Let's dive in. For as long as he could remember, Bill had worked the same 1,000 acres his father and grandfather had before him. Unlike the massive corporate farms that now dominated the landscape, Anderson Farm was a family-run operation, one that had served both the local community and the military for generations. The farm wasn't just a place of work, it was a piece of living history. For 30 years, without fail, Bill had personally maintained a special landing zone in his south field. Just like his father had done during the Vietnam War, he made sure that military helicopters had a reliable place to train. Pilots from an airbase 2 states away depended on that field. Every week, without fail, they would arrive for crucial night landing practice, honing the skills they would need in the real world. And Bill wasn't alone in this effort. His wife, Martha, played a part too. She was always there, preparing fresh coffee and sandwiches for the crews who trained long into the night. "Can't expect our boys to train on an empty stomach," she'd say, handing out warm meals to the servicemen and women who came through their farm. It was never about money. It was about service, about duty, about making sure those who defended the nation had everything they needed. But times were changing. For 40 years, Bill had never had a single problem with the county. His farm had always been there, quietly supporting the military in a way that most people didn't even realize. But then, last year, everything changed. A Silicon Valley developer, Techscape, bought up the land surrounding Anderson Farm, and suddenly, the traditions Bill had upheld for decades were under threat. The developers weren't interested in history, in service, or in the sacrifices made by military families. All they saw was prime real estate, land they could turn into high-tech campuses, corporate offices, and luxury housing. And Bill's farm? It was right in the middle of their plans. "We're offering you well above market value," they told him. "You won't get a better deal than this." But no amount of money could replace what the Andersons had built. This wasn't just land. It was a lifeline for young pilots. It was a place where servicemen and women learned the skills that kept them alive in combat. Some of the very same pilots who had trained there had gone on to serve in conflicts from Desert Storm to Afghanistan. Bill sat at his kitchen table, staring at the final eviction notice. 50 years of tradition, of unwavering service to his country, was about to be erased, not by war, not by disaster, but by corporate greed. His father had maintained these fields through the Cold War. His grandfather had started the tradition during World War II. And now, after all that time, it was all about to disappear. One by one, he had watched his neighbors give in. The Montgomery Place, where helicopter crews had once rested between exercises, was already marked for demolition. Down the road, the Wilson family had sold their 200 acres, land that had served as an emergency landing zone for decades. Every night, Bill and Martha sat at their kitchen table, looking at the offers from Techscape. "I just don't get it," Bill would say, shaking his head. "We've helped train pilots for half a century. How can they just wipe that history away?" Martha would take his hand, her eyes filled with the same sadness. They had sacrificed so much, stayed up late for years, fed countless pilots passing through. And now it seemed like none of it mattered. That afternoon, Bill decided to make a statement. With trembling hands, he put up a sign at the edge of his property. "Notice: Military Training Zone Closing. Anderson Farm, serving our forces since 1943. Something about writing those words made it all feel terrifyingly real. Below the sign, he added a smaller note. "Thank you for 50 years of service to our country." Bill didn't tell the military at first. He just kept doing what he had always done, maintaining the landing zone, setting out the lights, making sure the training could continue. But people noticed something was off. His proud stance was a little more hunched. His voice cracked over the radio when he called out coordinates. A young reporter came by, intrigued by the sign. She took photos and asked about the farm's history. Bill told her everything. How his grandfather had first opened the land to pilots in World War II, how they had supported training through Korea, Vietnam, and every war since. He didn't expect much to come of it. Just another story about history being erased in the name of progress. But something about that simple sign, that quiet act of defiance, struck a chord. The photo started circulating in military circles. 5 decades of pilot training, gone just like that, one post read. The story took off. Veterans shared their memories of training at Anderson Farm. Some talked about Bill's night landing training. Others remembered Martha's coffee and sandwiches during long exercises. The posts spread like wildfire. That evening, Bill was in his barn when the landline rang. His daughter had been begging him to get a cell phone for years, but he always said the old one worked just fine. "Mr. Anderson," a voice said. "Please hold for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Bill nearly dropped the receiver. Was this a joke? But then, another voice came on the line. "Mr. Anderson, I saw the story about your farm. Tell me about it." For the next 20 minutes, Bill spoke about service, not politics, just service. About the late nights, the pilots who trained there, the tradition of dedication that spanned generations. Finally, the chairman spoke again. "We can't lose training grounds like yours. Give me 24 hours. Bill barely knew what to say. The highest-ranking military officer in the country had just promised to help save his farm. The next morning, the sound of rotor blades filled the sky. An Apache appeared over the trees, followed by 3 Black Hawks. As they landed, Bill saw the markings. These weren't training crews. This was the Pentagon's fleet. 2 generals stepped out, briefcases in hand. "Mr. Anderson, we're here to make sure your farm stays exactly where it belongs, serving the United States military." An hour later, sitting at his kitchen table with Martha pouring coffee, Bill signed the papers. His farm was now a protected military training site. Developers couldn't touch it. Later that day, those same generals walked into Techscape's offices. "Your development plans," one executive stammered, "have been superseded," the general said, "by national security interests." Within hours, other farmers received calls. The Montgomery Place? Safe. The Wilson's Emergency Landing Zone? Protected. One by one, the threatened farms were saved. Anderson Farm still stands. Bill's grandson, Jimmy, now helps maintain the landing zones. Pilots still train.